Hi Year 6, new reader for you today. Miss Evans takes some time out. She'll be back for future chapters unless you would like me to carry on. Say hi everyone.
Hi!
So we're going to read chapter 9 today, and it's from the viewpoint of Esker. Esker ran blindly into the twilight, her head full of bears and wolves and cursed anthems. She hadn't wanted to leave the labyrinth, even when Flint disappeared into the tent and she was left alone with the third tribe and their mutterings. She's cursed by the Ice Queen, she's rotten to the core. But Esker was no match for Blade, and when he seized her by the arm and marched her towards the ladder, she had no choice but to follow. Now she kept running. Back in Winterfang, she had always dreamed of escaping and finding the tribes, but the Fur people hadn't been what she was expecting, and she felt more alone than ever now. When Blade had grabbed her, she had wanted to call out Flint, for whom she had started to think of as a friend, but she hadn't dared, because she could see the Fur tribe were turning against him, and Flint didn't deserve that. Esker stumbled over a log and crashed down into the snow. She lay there for several seconds, her eyes shining with unshed tears. An owl hooted. The darkness drew closer, and Esker forced herself to her feet. She needed to find some kind of shelter before the light vanished completely. Food would have to wait until the morning. The shadow of a lynx flitted between the trees, and every time a branch creaked or a twig snapped, Esker flinched. But she kept going until she eventually came to a few slats of wood arranged like a wigwam around a tree trunk. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hide until dawn. And so, gathering up a handful of sticks and moss for a fire, Esker crawled inside. She reached into her pocket and drew out the 2 splints of metal inch had stuffed into her palm as Blade pushed her down the ladder. She hadn't looked to see what they were at this time, though she had her suspicions, but as she turned them over in her hand, now she felt a lump in her throat. Fire starters. There had been goodness among the Fur tribe, but their fear of outsiders was so deep-rooted it meant it wasn't as easy to spot as she had hoped. She stuck her metal splints against each other again and again, just as Flint had done back in the food store, but nothing happened, and before long, Esker's fingers felt like roots of ice. Please work, she whimpered. Please work. And perhaps somewhere the sky gods were listening, because the flames caught them, and lying on her side in that abandoned shack, Esker watched them flicker until she fell asleep. She woke to the sound of a sleigh skimming over the snow, stamping out the embers of the fire. Esker waited. The light coming through the slats showed it was the dawn already, but something wasn't right. Esker listened for the Ice Queen's anthem, for the voices floating out over the kingdom, but there was nothing, which could only mean one thing. The Ice Queen wasn't in her palace. She was on the move. The sound of the sleigh drew closer, and Esker hugged her knees to her chest. It sounded different to the sled that had whisked away from her from Winterfang. It was louder against the snow, heavier, and instead of the patter of husky paws rushing through the trees, Esker could hear the pounding of hooves. Her blood froze. Musk oxen. And only one person rode a sleigh drawn by musk oxen. The Ice Queen. Esker's skin chilled. The Fur tribe would have brushed away her footprints from the labyrinth the night before, but once a safe distance away from the hideout, they would have left them, which meant the Ice Queen could track her. Esker chewed her lip. She couldn't stay. The Ice Queen had to hex these musk oxen so that they had the strength to run for hours on end. They would find her soon. She had to run fast, as far as she could. She lifted back a slat of wood and darted out of the shack into the dazzling sunlight, half running, half stumbling as she pushed through the trees. Her legs were unsteady beneath her, and after a few seconds, a stitch burnt in her side. But she forced herself on, one boot in front of the other. She wasn't going back to Winterfang. Not now. Not ever. Esker scrambled over fallen trees and skidded on patches of ice, but fear made her blunder on. Then she threw a glance over her shoulder. The Ice Queen's silver sleigh was there, 50 metres behind, carving a channel through the trees. The Queen's eyes met Esker's, and she smiled through the thin blue lips, her teardrop gown billowing behind her. 2 tusked warriors clad in breastplates of ice armour and holding whips and spears stood on the sleigh either side of her, and in front 4 enormous musk oxen which batted black coats and swooping horns churned up the snow. Stop, in the name of the Ice Queen, the guards roared. Esker dragged her legs on, her heart smashing against her ribcage. She needed the forest to close in, like it had around the labyrinth. Then the Ice Queen's sleigh wouldn't be able to force its way through. But the trees here were growing sparser and smaller, and from behind Esker, a whip lashed and the musk oxen ran faster. Then, to Esker's horror, the trees stopped, just like that, and she burst out into the open. In front of her now were the foothills of the mountains, rolling valleys that folded in rivers of melting ice and little copses of trees, before eventually climbing up to form the Nevercliffs. The morning sun glittered over the hills, and with a sweeping sense of dread, Esker tried to keep running. but even the slightest incline bit back at her. She didn't have the stamina for the wild, and she knew it. The sleigh raced closer, and Esker whirled round to see the Ice Queen, just meters away, standing in front of her cushioned seat, her staff held high in her hands. Esker grimaced and turned up to carry on, but the Queen's words wrapped round her like a snare. You ran away, Esker. Forgot, ungrateful child, after everything I did to keep you safe at Winterfang. Keep me safe, Esker planted as she ploughed up the hill. You held me under a curse. The moment the words left her mouth, Esker realised her mistake. Fear had made her careless. It had caught her off guard. So you can speak, you little wretch. And the Ice Queen laughed, a bitter laugh that made Esker's skin crawl. She ran on, hardly daring to look behind her. Then something hard and cold slammed to her back, and she was flung face first to the ground. Spitting snow and gasping for breath, she looked up. A circle of oxen closed in. Their heads hung low, and their black ice horns glinting in the sunlight. The Ice Queen held up her staff, and the musk oxen stayed where they were, thrashing their horns from side to side. Then she stepped off her sleigh, leaving the tusked guards standing either side of it. I've come to take you home, she cooed, and the musk oxen parted as she stepped into the circle. She stooped and slid 5 long white fingers around Esker's neck. Esker's pulse drummed at the sight of the red ring on the Ice Queen's thumb. She'd heard Sliver say it was filled with frozen blood. Then, quite unexpectedly, there was a scream from one of the guards. The eagle had come out from nowhere, a golden bullet racing through the sky and ripping the guards' spears from their hands. The man grappled in the snow for their weapons, but before they could snatch them up, the eagle turned and plummeted again, raking its talons across the guard's face. The men fell to the ground, clutching their bloodied skin, while the eagle beat away its mighty wings up into the sky once more. Ignoring the guards' cries, the Ice Queen grabbed Esker by the scruff of her neck and dragged her towards the sleigh. She stamped her staff on the snow, and the musk oxen obeyed, gathering in line before the vehicle. But the eagle was carrying down again, its body tucked in like a barrel. Esker closed her eyes as the bird plunged towards her. She felt sure that it would never stop again, but at the very last moment it spread out its wings, and in one sweeping arc it dashed the staff from the Ice Queen's hand, splitting it into 2 with its talons. The musk oxen jerked at the ropes that bound them to the sleigh, suddenly waking from the curse that the staff had held over them, and when their ropes snapped, the Ice Queen's grip on Esker loosened just long enough for her to dart free. She scrambled backwards, hardly noticing that something had slipped from her pocket in the snow, then flung herself into a run. Behind her, the Ice Queen screamed as the musk oxen, no longer under her command, charged off into the forest. Esker ran at the hill, her ears ringing with the eagle's high-pitched cries, and only at the top did she allow herself to glance back. The eagle was nowhere to be seen now, but the Ice Queen was bent over the snow, and with a shrill laugh, she picked something up and glared at Esker. I will steal your voice by force, she shrieked. When Sliver sees what I have here in my hand, there will be no stopping his contraption. Esker's insides turned as she dug her own hand into her pocket. The key to the music box was no longer there, and while she couldn't possibly know what Sliver had created or how the Ice Queen planned to use the key, Esker realised the threat of it all, because the Queen was stalking off towards the forest, back to Winterfang, with her guards trailing blindly behind her. She could have batted on against an eagle if the bird had returned, but she hadn't, and the fact lay that a cold dark stone inside it Esker. She watched the Ice Queen disappear into the trees, and then turn back into the foothills. They rose and fell before her like waves, and Esker wondered how anyone could remember their way through when every hill looked just like the last. She sighed, then her eyes fixed on a lone tree a little further down the hill, and there was the eagle, perched on a branch like a sentinel. Esker approached slowly and stopped just a few meters away from the bird, and, as she watched the majestic creature, something like a memory, only looser and less defined, stirred inside her. It was a feeling that although she had no obvious place among the Erkenwald's people, she might just have a place amongst its animals. The feeling lingered for a second longer, and then vanished, and Esker carried on looking at the eagle. It was the same one she had freed from the snare before Deep Roots. She could see the wound to its left talon, still red and raw from the trap, but that hadn't stopped it attacking just moments ago, and Flint's words about it struggling to survive with an injured talon seemed almost ridiculous now. But, even if Esker hadn't seen that talon, she would have known the eagle by its eyes, yellow orbs, fierce like the sun. The eagle blinked, and then it launched itself off its branch and sailed across the hills until it was nothing more than a speck in the sky, leaving Esker alone once again. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 9, and then chapter 10 is also from the viewpoint of Esker, which will be read by myself or Miss Evans, who knows. Remember, my loyal subscribers, to like, comment, subscribe. Press this button maybe here. I don't know. But let everyone know about the channel. We want to get the subscribers up. But like, subscribe, follow, turn on notifications. I've heard that's an important one to turn here. Is that right?
Yeah.
So turn on notifications for future videos and future content. See you later.